All right, now that you understand the basics of getting started in Photoshop and you're familiar with the workspace and the panels and how all that works, in this section we're going to jump onto layers. And Photoshop is all about layers. All right, so if you think of layers panel, if you go to window then layers, you can see the many different layers, right? So think of it as many different sheets of paper. Whatever's on the top is the only thing you can see if it's covering up the whole workspace or the whole artboard. So it will cover up the layers below it. Now it won't cover it up if it's not, geographically placed on top of it. Like if it's over to the side, you'll be able to see to a lower layer, the layer right below it, right? The second to top layer. And then you can see the third and fourth if they're all just in different spots on the canvas. However, if you adjust the transparency, in other words, how opaque the layer is in the layers panel, then you will be able to see through the top layer, whatever layer you're on, to the layer below it. You can also adjust the layer blending mode, which we'll go over. You can add a layer style. You can also add special effects like lighting and color adjustment using adjustment layers. So if you're changing a blending mode it's basically how a layer blends with the layer below it. So if you change the blending mode on top, say it's a 2-layer Photoshop file, if you change it to say multiply, then it's gonna have a specific effect, or darken, it's gonna have a darkening effect, as opposed to screen or lighten, which will have a lightening effect. So it will blend in a different way. By default, it's just 100% opacity. It's not see-through, and there's no blending effect. You just see the top layer by default. So we'll be going over that in this section. So one thing to consider is whenever you're in Photoshop and you add a filter or you're using the brush tool to brush some paint on, whatever layer you're on is the only one that's affected. That confuses a lot of beginners in Photoshop. They pull the brush tool out and they start painting on, and they notice that it has affected one layer that they were on, but it hasn't affected other layers. Depending on how high up the layer is in hierarchy, depends on how much of it is visible, of course. So look in the layers panel. If it's not up, just go to window then layers, and this will make sense throughout these lectures, but you just want to see which one is highlighted, and that's the active layer that you're going to actually apply an effect to. Now you can resize the image. If you go to image and image size, that's going to affect the whole file regardless. It'll affect all the layers at once. But certain effects, for example filters, and if you're brushing and if you're moving with the move tool, the layer, and you're applying other effects, it's only going to affect the layer that you're on. So just check and see which layer is selected in the layers panel. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started learning about layering images, as well as adjustment layers and layer styles, and more about layers in Photoshop.